Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park, and we are here with our first read of A Tiny Upward Shove.
Mm-hmm.
And in this book, we find out a lot about an aswang.
Yes.
Do you know what an aswang is, or did you know previous to this book?
Yes. Many other Filipinx kids like myself who grew up in Filipino homes where the culture and the tradition is fully a part of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Aswang is the threat to us all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go outside at night because there's aswang.
Mm-hmm.
Don't leave your family without them knowing where you are because there's aswang. Don't try to not finish your dinner or the aswang is gonna get you.
So was an aswang only an outside creature?
No, aswang can be in the home too.
Like it can attack inside?
Exactly.
So if I try to smuggle a choco pie from the kitchen to my bedroom to eat it late at night like a snack, would the aswang get me?
Yes, the aswang might be at the corner of your room. Get ready to get you.
Oh. Did you believe in the aswang when you were growing up?
So, what's interesting is that I grew up in a Pentecostal but also Catholic Christian home. Mm-hmm. So, did I personally believe in aswang? Yes and no. Because I went to a Pentecostal church and we didn't believe in mystical creatures, but we did believe in demons and the devil. So essentially, yes, I still believed in the aswang.
So you just thought the aswang was like a devil or a demon?
Demon, yeah.
I don't know if I had anything like this personally. I feel like growing up, I didn't need an aswang. I just needed my mom to threaten me with my dad.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like you just needed something to fear. And I felt like with Filipino kids, we needed more things to fear, not just our parents.
See, I feel like my dad was scary enough where I would have hoped that an aswang would have came.
Oh, no.
I would have been like, please, aswang, come defend me.
Oh,
come defend this house. We'll talk more about aswangs and that kind of culture, but I don't know. Like, for me personally, growing up, I don't think that there was a big figure like that. Same thing, also grew up in like a Southern Korean Baptist church, so I don't know if we just didn't believe in it because of that fact, but we also had other traditions where we did have spirits and those kind of things. But
did you have evil spirits that you had to defend against or be afraid of?
No, just my dad. I'm just kidding. No, not really. It was more just spirits of like our grandparents and things like that, which we would summon on their ancestral days and things like that.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think it has something, at least in the Tagalog/Filipinx Filipino tradition, I think it stems from like the spiritual realm, and I won't say it's a religion, but the spirituality before Catholicism. Yeah.
There's in Korean culture, like shamanism and Buddhism are two of the structurally religious practices that were there.
Yeah.
So maybe it's stuff that was just not within my family of things. I know the part of like bringing in ancestors is somewhat similar to what happens with Hispanic cultures in like Dios de los Muertos.
Yes.
So I think there probably is some of that kind of shamanism stuff in the culture, but yeah, we never like wrung out spirits or had that as a fear tool.
Gotcha.
But I don't know, maybe it was just my family.
That's fair.
Yeah. But, you know, every family's a little bit different.
Yes.
Pretty much the only way that I would have found out about this aswang is, I think, through this book, which leads us to our recommendation for the week.
So, for our recommendation of the week, I'm recommending You and Me Books, which was founded by Lucy Yu. It's a bookstore that focuses on the strong, diverse voices of our community with a focus on immigrant stories. Due to a fire that affected the building where the brick and mortar store was located in early July, Unfortunately, You and Me Books' physical storefront is currently closed. However, we can support them by giving to their GoFundMe for their recovery fund or ordering through their bookshop. You can stay up to date and know more about their story through their Instagram at You and A&D Me Books and their website You and Me Books, YUANDME Books.com.
Yeah, and I think this original storefront was located in New York, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so, local bookstores aren't making a ton of money. So when
Right.
things like this or vandalism or robberies, things like that happen, I think it really does truly affect their margins because it's pretty small in general.
Right, and it also affects their community because they're such a cornerstone of Chinatown as well.
Right. So not everyone is going to have the means to be able to give to them, but even if you don't have the money, then maybe kind of publicize it over your Instagram, maybe just spread the news about it, because that's also helpful for people that maybe have more of the monetary or the time that they can input to helping a bookstore like You and Me.
Absolutely, or just giving them a follow could be helpful.
Right. So that's You and Me Books and youandmebooks.com.
Yeah.
And that's our recommendation for the week. Okay, so like I said, we're starting a tiny upward shove. And this is the book pick that you chose.
Yes, and it's written by Melissa Chadburn.
Right. And we have broken this book down into 4 parts.
Yes, and this week we read the first quarter of the book, pages 1 through 88 in the hardcover, which starts with the chapter called Tinikling, and we end with the chapter called Pork is a Seasoning.
Right. So, firstly, this book is pretty graphic.
Yes, very graphic. There's detailed retellings of violence, of death and gore, and also of intimacy, so it's definitely not safe for work. Especially for those of you who are reading the audiobook, you might want to not listen to it on speakers unless everyone around you is okay with that.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And I wouldn't even say intimacy. I would say maybe sexual assault in some of these cases.
There is sexual assault. There's also very few moments of consensual intimacy, but there is a lot of sexual assault as well. So be aware of that.
Right. And more personally, there's another reason why you didn't like the audiobook.
Yes. I loved the narrator and the way they had a storytelling voice. However, the Tagalog words were mispronounced left and right.
Yeah. And, it doesn't affect everyone. And if you're not someone who maybe you don't speak Tagalog or that part doesn't bother you,
Yeah.
it may not be as much of a limitation. But I know with me personally, having read or listened to audiobooks of different Korean stories, even Pachinko, because the reader for Pachinko was Japanese.
Yes.
So when she pronounced Korean words, it was a little bit cringy. It didn't completely deter me, but it definitely led to me being pulled out of the story a little bit whenever I heard those words pronounced incorrectly.
Totally. And that's how I felt reading this book through audiobook. I felt like I was being taken out of the story and also trying to understand what the words were. But again, if it's for you, that's totally awesome. I totally appreciate the narrative voice of the reader, though.
Right. There is another part where some of the chapters, or actually all the chapters, are separated by the story that they're telling and then intermissions of the aswang speaking.
Yes.
So I didn't listen to the audiobook for this one, but usually when I listen to stories, when they try to switch those characters, sometimes I get lost within those stories.
Absolutely.
So I do like the reading aspect for this book particularly.
It's totally a visual, not only imagery-wise in your mind, but visual as in the physical visual.
Right. So, not safe for work. There's a lot of stuff, like we said, in here.
Yeah.
Read it for yourself and
Yes.
kind of go through it. But one of the parts that I think are really important are on page 76. And that's when they bring up the namesake of this book.
Yes. And essentially what's happening is that Marina, the main character, is trying to get this bird out of the heater that seems to be stuck. And her mom is in a rush because they need to get going. And Marina asks her mom's help. Her mom eventually, and here comes the graphic
she
part.
initially tries to help.
Well, I mean, she does help, quote unquote.
Right, but initially she's trying to move the bird in a direction that is harmless.
Right, like pulling it downward.
Uh-huh.
But it's too stuck that way and it's too fluffy to go down that way.
Right.
So her mom does the opposite and is like, well, the only way is up now.
Mm-hmm. Which there's like a fan or something? There's a machine
there's
or something
that's
overhead.
Moving, yeah.
Yeah.
And so she pushes the bird up, which mangles the poor thing.
She gives it a tiny upward shove.
So this goes into the quote
on
page 76 where Marina says, "What did you do?" She asked, her voice shaky. The mom responds, "Just what we have to do, sweetie. Help a hurt thing on its way. A tiny upward shove."
Mm-hmm. Which sounds like the role of the aswang, which we'll kind of talk about next. But it seems like, because from what I've read from a very well-renowned source called Wikipedia and Google, it seems like the aswang is seen as this very negative imagery in the Philippines. Is that right?
So, like I mentioned earlier when we talked about the folklore, aswang is meant to be a cautionary tale.
Right.
Yes, so it's not necessarily negative, but it's also not something you want to be or to encounter.
Right, because the explanations that I saw were like vampires and monsters and things that will attack you.
Yeah.
I think I even read it'll attack you for no reason sometimes.
Right.
But there is, the cautionary tales of it'll attack you for more specific reasons.
Right.
So that's why, and from what I was assuming, is there was not a whole lot of good involved with the aswang character. From the reading of it, it seems like it's kind of like flip the narrative. Like the aswang is actually something that's good and protective, that is going to be kind of an overwatcher of the family.
Right.
So let's talk about the aswang.
Yeah. So in the book, it kind of delineates how certain people become aswang, which I never really knew about, or at least I've never heard it retold this way.
Which might be more specific to just Melissa's storytelling. So Melissa Chadburn's storytelling.
For sure.
Because this may be her perception of it. It may just... Because, like, we have all those zombie movies that come out.
Right.
And there's a million different ways that the zombies are prepared.
Right, exactly.
And their different abilities and things.
Yes.
So this might just be Melissa Chadburn's take on the aswang.
Totally. Or it could be a regional thing, too.
Right.
So in the book... And if you're following along on the hardcover, this is found on pages 14 to 15. There are 3 ways of becoming an aswang. One is a fertilized egg ritual done at the full moon. Second is transmission from an aswang who wants to give up their immortality to another person. And then the third is heredity, which is activated by, like we mentioned, unfinished business.
Right. And it mainly goes through the bloodlines of the women in the family.
Yes, exactly.
And it was very specific to kind of mention that.
Right. Totally. And so, like we said, in this book, it seems that the aswang is more of a finisher, not someone or something that wants to do bad necessarily, although there are instances of that. But what's interesting is that the bad aswang in this book was a man. And that man was essentially forcing the aswang immortality to Marina, I believe.
Right, but it sounds like that might be a consistent theme. It maybe not just men, but it seems like, maybe it is men, but it seems like it's kind of something that happens bad upon women, and it doesn't seem like this storytelling. So what happens is Marina is found in this situation very early on. The book is kind of how everything is introduced to us.
Yeah.
And she is pretty much murdered by this pig farmer, Willie.
Yeah.
And so this leads to the aswang coming in and taking over Marina's body.
Right, exactly.
So I don't know, something in the reading, I can't remember specifically, but something in there made me think that this wasn't the first time a woman was murdered or harmed or, in some way affected by a man that would have led an aswang to take over that body.
Totally. And that brings us to the next major topic, which is the layers and the generations.
Right.
So it started out with their great grandmother, Maria Lobo,
Right.
who was being passed immortality from an aswang. Like we said earlier, this was a man aswang who decided, hey, I'm going to give you my immortality. I don't even know why he decided to do that, but he decided to assault her in that way.
Yeah, because in that story, it seemed like Maria was going to help him out.
Right.
As a job or something.
Right. Like, for some reason,
Right.
Maria Lobo was trying to be generous to this person. And
Right.
the thing was, the town was telling her, no, be careful. This is the rumor that this person is an aswang. Right. And it turns out that rumor was true. And instead of accepting her help, he forces his quote-unquote help by giving her immortality.
Right. And so what we find out is that the aswang is there for 7 generations.
Yes.
It's not allowed to be past that. It sounds like once it's there, then the job is done.
Right.
But the other thing we find out through Maria Lobo's story is what the aswang actually has to do, or the person has to do who's possessed by the aswang, to make sure that you keep that aswang and the immortality.
Yeah.
And that is to eat another human.
Right.
So I think that might have been Melissa Chadburn's recollection of the horrors that aswang do in the folklore of the Philippines.
Yeah.
So maybe this is her way of explaining out why they might terrorize people, is not just randomly, but as an effort to keep immortality.
Yes, for sure.
But what we find out is Maria Lobo wasn't able to do that. She couldn't take it within herself to do that to someone else just so that she could benefit.
Yes, exactly. And so later on down the line, Lorenza, the wife to Maria Lobo's great-grandson, Jose, also ends up becoming an aswang because she was distraught from his untimely death, and it seemed like the grief ate her up, and so she ended up becoming aswang.
Right.
And unfortunately, similar to Maria Lobo's story, she couldn't find it within herself to destroy her family or be near anybody because she didn't want to do that.
Right, exactly. She kind of separated herself from her family just to kind of protect them.
Yes, exactly.
But that then leads us to the third possession of this aswang, and that is Marina Salas.
Yes. And with Marina, it's totally different in that she was murdered, like we said, by Willie. And at first, she was trying to say incantations, trying to pray for help. But instead, the last thing that she thought of were the things that she couldn't finish, the things that she wished she could have done. And that is how the aswang was activated and brought into her body. Right.
And so one of the words that they mention fairly frequently is a bad word that I really enjoy using now, and I use it very often, but that's not the word I'm thinking of. The word that I'm thinking of is tinikling.
Yeah.
So what I grew up knowing about tinikling is the dance?
Yes.
Which is the same word?
Yes.
Okay, but what is tinikling in this context?
So tinikling is the dance, is the bamboo dance, and what Melissa calls it is the double dutch of the Philippines. And essentially, for those who are not familiar with tinikling, it is 2 bamboo pieces being operated by 2 people and creating a beat that goes dun 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 dun. So it's like a hit, slam, hit, slam, where another person, a dancer,
or multiple people,
multiple dancers, are trying to avoid their feet getting slammed by the bamboo. Before, it's so that their feet don't get cut off by the bamboo, but now it's simpler than that, and it's just like not getting caught by it.
Right. And, it reminds me a little bit of like the footwork of jump rope, something where it's kind of just this
very light steps.
Right. But she uses it as a way of mentioning how the possession is happening.
Yeah. So it kind of brings in an idea of lightly stepping into the body rather than
just fully possessing.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Because within the different chapters, like I said, the aswang is speaking through this first person narrative.
Yeah.
And we get to see the viewpoint of what that spirit or possession thing.
Creature.
Right.
Yes.
We get to see what their brain is thinking.
Right.
And that possession happens over all of these chapters. It even is that dance of, I'm starting to enter the body. This is what I'm doing.
Yes.
This is what I'm feeling. This is where we are. And just kind of feeling out things.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense of why she would compare it to, I can't say the word, go ahead.
Tinikling.
Yeah.
And tinikling, for not only is it a dance, it's also in reference to a bird that moves that way.
Nice.
Yeah. So that brings us full circle back to the tragedy brought on by men.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, do you think that this is a commentary on patriarchy, or is it just a commentary on patriarchy among Filipino men?
I mean, I'm not sure. But one thing that I think this book does really well is it presents the picture of the family a little bit. She kind of puts the surrounding situation of what that household might look like weaved into the story. So we get to see all these really negative instances of like the grandfather being abusive, and we'll talk about Willie in a second, but we get to see Willie's lifestyle and how much abuse surrounds this man and how that affects him. And obviously Willie's the one that eventually kills Marina. And so we now know that these traditions, I don't know, I don't want to call them traditions, but these negative ways of
patterns?
handling, these are now passed down from generation to generation.
Right. And then it leaves the women, the girls in these lineages having to pick up the pieces, which I think is why they, at least in this book, aswang is usually women, because they're the ones who have to finish the business.
Right. And I would definitely say this seems much more like a female empowering story, because the purpose of the aswang is to finish the job or to, to round things out.
Right.
That's their whole purpose.
Yeah.
And if it's always possessed in a woman, it's kind of saying like, women are the ones that
have to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, and just putting it all together.
Yeah. It's just unfortunate that it has to come at the cost of their demise too.
Right. So let's then talk about one of the bigger negative figures who's also a male within the story, and that's Willie. Yep. Because a lot of the first quarter of this book seems to deal around Willie. So it seems like Melissa Chadbourne definitely focalizes the experiences that Willie had.
Right.
So we're not just talking about a serial killer, which is definitely what it seems like he is.
Yeah, it seems like he is a villain, but he's a villain who's human.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's human. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
But his nature didn't seem to always be that way. But even from the start of what led him to the pigs was by watching his father sexually abuse his mother in the kitchen. And so then he hid amongst the pigs, and we saw him getting bullied at school and abused. He didn't find comfort within his parents because his father was abusive. His mother was abusive because she didn't like the way he smelled, and there was that whole scene with him being forced into the shower and all that stuff. So we see this pattern of him just mentally and physically being torn down. Yeah. And then we eventually find that scene in, I think it's the last chapter, if not the second to last chapter, where he is now becoming that character that is icky. There's that girl that lifts up her dress and but I think this doesn't humanize him necessarily. I mean, he is a human, but I think it more just tells the story of this person may not have always been this way. Almost like if we had an alternate universe and all this crap didn't happen to him.
Right. Maybe he wouldn't have turned out this way.
Exactly.
So this just reminds us that there's a web of interconnected story between not only Willie and Marina, and not only Marina and the aswang, but there's just layers and non-linear storytelling throughout this book, which, like we mentioned earlier, made reading the audiobook a little confusing because there was no delineation between the aswang and the human. So it's kind of like a dual timeline, the human side versus the aswang side, and some of it is past, some of it is present, some of it is past. So definitely, if you want to be able to see the full scope of each story, highly recommend reading the book physically.
And one of the other parts that you won't be able to see is in one of the last chapters, and that's Lola's list of like the ways to live.
Yes, oh my word, Lola. Ay, ay, ay.
There's a lot of, I guess, old school ideas
Very
involved.
old school.
There's tradition involved.
Yes.
There's like even the rice making. Like there's so many things that I feel like it may have expired in thought, and maybe those aren't the best things. But then we have the other things that are like still very much true.
Right.
This is going to be found on pages 83 through 86.
Yes.
Now, one of my favorites is actually number 16 and 17. So I combine them because it's what kind of man to find. And it's such an old school thought, but it also explains a lot of Phil Am's in the U.S.
You mean currently, right?
Right. Like, and it's not all, but you see this sometimes with some of the people who are of mixed race, who are Filipino and Caucasian or American. And number 16 is, it is best to date a man at least 10 years older than you so he can take care of you. It is best to date an American man, and even better if he is white. The other one is, try to find an army man or a cop, someone with a uniform.
Oh my gosh, I know specifically people are coming to mind.
Right, and like in Guam,
yes,
the military is a huge presence
very
there.
big presence, yes.
So that number 17 of trying to find an army man or something sometimes is utilized, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then that kind of reminds me, that leads to number 20, which made me like inwardly cringe because I was told this. Number 20 says, don't be intimidated if the mother of your suitor refers to him as a gift from God. But if he is her only son, smile politely and find another boyfriend. He will never have enough time for you. Yes, it was almost word for word what I was told.
Did you follow that rule?
I mean, I'm no longer with that person, so I think it worked.
Did you have a favorite amongst these?
Among these, I mean, not necessarily. I loved that on number 10, like you said, about the rice and how to make proper rice is exactly what I follow.
Yeah, I think a lot of these are pretty funny.
Yes.
And once again, also possibly a little bit true. There's one about like pinching your nose, like when you're a kid so you can reshape it.
Yeah.
Which deals with some of the colonization that happened in the Philippines. So
and also like the parts about not being under the sun, about bleaching your skin, definitely all colonial.
But also very true to, I think, what people had to grow up with.
Right.
Now, there are different things that bothered me a little bit about this read. Overall, I think the story does pick up.
Yes.
But the beginning of this book, I thought was a little bit harder. I felt like I had to trudge a little bit through like this brush.
That's fair.
Before I could get into the story.
That's fair.
The way that this book handles its narratives or their discussions, I didn't like as much. So it's a little bit confusing because sometimes the actual conversations aren't well separated, nor are a lot of quotations used to really delineate who's speaking. So sometimes I kind of had to go back and be like, all right, who are they talking? Is it a thought? So that part I didn't quite like as much. The other part that really confused me for a while, and I had to ask Jamae this within the middle of my read, is who the heck is Reen and Rena, and then there's Marina, and I was like, okay, I think I know who it is because they kind of talk about it in the beginning. So it's not that they that Melissa Chadburn didn't mention it, but as I'm reading it, I had to remind myself who this
one
character
person
is.
Yeah.
Yes. So for anyone else that might be confused, it's probably just me because this is my issues with reading. But Marina, Reen, and Rena are the same person. From what I remember in the story, Marina is more of like her actual name and more of the formal, like you got in trouble kind of name.
Yes.
Whereas normally she's called Reen and Rena.
Yes. And it's the same thing with her mom. Marina calls her Ma, of course. And then her Lola, who is her mom's mom, calls her Mutya, which means pearl or charm.
That's not her name?
No. That's kind of like her pet name or her endearment. So, going back to what you were saying about how there aren't any quotation marks, that the only italicization is when it's in the aswang's point of view. This reminds me of Elaine Castillo's America is Not the Heart, where she does the same thing. She doesn't use quotation marks. There is no delineation between speaking and not speaking and narration versus thoughts. So, what I think is happening, besides Melissa Chadburn maybe breaking away from tradition, I think what's also happening, and this could just be me and my interpretation, is that in Filipino culture, there is almost no delineation between what you're thinking versus what someone else is saying. So, for example, and I mean, I know I mention my mom a lot, but it's because she is in my brain. So that's exactly what I'm saying. What my mom says is sometimes what is my inner voice. And so I think that's what's kind of happening here too. Or an example of what could be happening. And then in terms of the different names, again, going back to Filipino culture, every person has multiple nicknames, multiple endearments. Like my name is not just Jamae, it's Jams, it's Jam Jam, it's Jamae. Everyone has a different name for me. Yes, and when they're talking amongst each other and referring to me by those different names, they're all referring to one person.
I think that's pretty similar to how I grew up too. I can't remember all the little nicknames that my parents gave me, but like I know at one point it was like Piggy, and it was like meant to be a little point of endearment. Like I remember specifically having that conversation with my dad and be like, I don't like this. Like I feel like it feels like body shaming kind of thing. I didn't have the words for it, and he was like, no, like that's not what we mean by it. And it's like very much a standpoint of endearment is what he was trying to prove. And you know, I call our cats Chunky, and I call our little cat Piggy, and you know, it's meant to be endearment, but that part makes sense, but as a reader, it's so hard to kind of keep track of sometimes. That's and I think that was the confusing part.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I just feel like for me, I felt familiarity in that, so it was easier to go with the flow with that.
It felt like home.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are going to continue on with this book. For me, like I said, I think it's getting to that better part where the story is flowing more.
Yes.
So I'm excited to read it. But we are on the second read of this book, and that's going to be from pages 89 to 172.
On the hardcover, and that is between the chapters called Man of the House all the way to the chapter called The Pines.
Yep. And hopefully there's less assault and abuse and things, but...
I mean, what are your predictions?
I don't know. We're clearly following Willie for a reason.
Right.
And it definitely seems like that story of we know what happens, we know the ending.
Yes.
But maybe we find out how we got there.
Right.
Towards the end of the chapters, we find that scene where Willie first sees Marina.
Right.
So I think very much it's going to be the telling of everything that's led up to it. But... I don't know. I think I'm just in it for the ride. I don't think I have too many predictions.
That's fair. I think very similarly that we're going to learn more about the middle of the story and specifically how Marina got into this, I guess, relationship with Willie.
Well, was she in a relationship?
Well, not necessarily a relationship like romantic relationship, but like this familiarity to the point that she followed him here.
I I thought she got kidnapped or something.
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't think they wrote anything about it.
Okay. So maybe I might have missed something, but maybe we're also gonna find out exactly how this kidnapping or this
whatever happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you feel like we read something wrong or you know what's actually going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Please message us.
Yes. You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com, or you can DM or comment on our posts on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Right, and we also have our website, asianbookclubpod.com, which is also going to have our bookshop on there, which gives our current recommendations and other recommendations we both read and plan to read. Otherwise, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.
Yeah.
But also make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat.
Bye.
Bye.